there's come up a lot of discussions so far in the video, and there has been some criticism at times that we're putting a lot of attention on this idea of the definition of a surname being a cognomen, which meant trick and deceit. I think the only way I can really explain it in its simplicity why we would have a Christian given name in a name that we use, and then a surname being more of the civil side, which is more connected to the idea of the money, because certainly you will not be operating in that system that we have today, filling out forms without putting in the surname, and therefore you will not receive anything from the world of man or civil society without putting in a surname. So we know that there is a very serious connection between that in the operation of government currently and those that participate within the idea of being within the citizenry of that. The concern that I have is probably a little bit of the lack of knowledge of people in understanding of it, and we're going to go into a tiny bit of law, especially going into dictionaries of law such as Bouvier's Law Dictionary 1856, which deals with a lot of civil law. And the answers are there to give people the history of a lot of things. So it's not that it's lacking, it's the fact that generally when I'm talking on a video and someone is at the other end receiving it, if they do not know something, and especially if they think they're educated, and they weren't told this by their college professor, their university professor, their school teacher from public school, and then going through secondary school, they did not see or have any of this information provided for them. They believe that it could not be real. Then when we bring it to print, then they usually discard it if their heart is in a position to be hardened because they believe they know everything, which is the danger of someone getting a degree, because usually they go down, they don't go up. So they're degreeing and usually saying that they know it all, and therefore you'll have less a discussion with someone with a degree than you will with probably the average man on the street who does not have maybe that formal education. And you could see the reason why Jesus had taken very, very simple, humble men to be his apostles. And therefore it is a concern at times when I'm doing these videos that I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. And I'm not trying to put myself on any platform. And I ask people to do their own research. And so we try to give you as much information on these videos so that you can go and do the due diligence. If you don't do the due diligence, I mean, certainly you can place the blame on me if you wish to do that. That would be your choice. But in life, cause and effect does happen, and therefore generally it would be very simple to say that we're the cause of our own injury more than not, because we do not wish to usually find the answers to things because we're afraid. We're afraid that maybe our entire life we've spent in a misled direction, and therefore we'd have to wipe the slate clean. So I'm asking you to at least take the opportunity, if you could, to research, because your lives are at stake. And the education, to some extent, on some of these concepts, I have to wipe out the scarring and the concern that you may have a thought on something that is not correct. It's erroneous, and there's a lot of pride and arrogance out in the world we live in, because we promote ego and meism, me first. And therefore this idea of the family name becomes quite a pride factor, and there's people that will try to say that their name's Smith or Taylor or whatever the surname may be. It's been in their family for so long, and it's theirs, and they're a Smith and they're a Taylor or they're something else, and we're not using those specifically for a reason to make those family surnames any better than any other one that's out there, but realize that they're there for a reason. It's really Satan's imagination of creating a false surety, because those are surety names for a civil system that you will guarantor, because no one else would be silly enough to guarantor it, and that's why they take your picture for it, because there's no evidence of it. There's no way of them to prove it, and even the Gentiles who claim they have these arms and these surnames, in actual reality, in examination, couldn't prove anything. It is a completely huge fertilizer pile that smells. And so when you go down the journey of this and research it, you'll find out that you, for one thing, shouldn't be proud of anything, because pride is not a good thing. because that is not something a Christian or someone humble wants to have, is pride, because pride is before a fall. And there is a big fall about to happen with the fall of the whole world empire of evil and misled information that is out there today, and it's about to happen in a worldwide scale. And therefore, the ones that are running this are gens, which basically, in its history, were Gentiles, and they had their own idea of a tribal background. So the Jews had the 12 tribes, the Israelites, and then the Gentiles, of course, created their own idea of a tribal heritage. But we know that the promise was with the Israelites originally, and then they violated as a nation under God their very holy position as a nation, protected. And they carried the Ark of the Covenant with their birth records in that Ark, along with the 10 Commandments and the law, and every Gentile nation or Canaanite nation that ever came around them, pagan origin, cities and places were in fear of them, based on the power that was walking with them when they walked with the law and the true God. And God does not renege on his promise, but the majority of that nation had turned down the Messiah, who came through the kingly bloodline of Judah, and therefore they ended up no longer a nation under God, and only those that accepted Christianity continued in the name of God through his Son Jesus Christ. So we have a very pagan Gentile world. The Jews had their moment, and now we're in the Gentile end, and all I could really explain to you is those that were the Jews who Jesus was in the temple with, turning over the tables, the money changers, are the same evil that runs the money changing to date. And they, of course, had no one else to mingle with other than unbelievers, so they joined the unbelievers. And they mingled in, so they laundered the money of the pagans. And so there is a mix-up in the world that we have today of, unfortunately, pagans who believe they can portray themselves to be of any religion. And we run a civil society based on anything goes, and so many people believe they're Christians, as many people believe they're Buddhists or Hindus. But technically, at the end of the day, when you're involved in a civil social society, you are under the power right now of evil, the gens, who are basically are operating under the guise of a system that is controlled by those that have a very, very good understanding of money changing in the temple. And therefore, the concern right now is that there is a mix-up of understanding between what is Christian, which is Jesus' surety, which has nothing to do with the Gentiles, other than the Gentiles, as the Jews had the opportunity to accept. So in definition of law of a Christian did not include, according to Bouvier's law, anybody that was a pagan, an infidel, a Jew, or a Mohammedan. Now that's the law, and that's the definition out of that. I do not write the law of man, but that was clearly understood to make people understand that they were not hiding what actually separated a Christian from the rest of the world. So therefore, if you're part of the world, you would be a Jew, a Mohammedan, an infidel, or a pagan, which would include probably the majority of people that may be watching this video at this moment, not realizing that they've associated themselves in social activity and by social covenant and contract, voluntarily and by consent. So we're here to clear up that you can go and do your research. If you do not like what I'm saying, just turn me off. It's simple as that. You don't have to watch the video. And don't send me any threatening nonsense, because that's not going to change the reality of what I'm reading you. So I'm going to narrate out of Bouvier's law, and in fact you will find this document that will be provided at the end of this video that will be up for your viewing so you can see it, because not everybody has a Bouvier's Law Dictionary 1856. And in fact, some things that are even online based on Bouvier's Law 1856 have been removed because they thought it would actually offend those, especially the Jews at the time that were dealing with it, of Christ, who refused to accept him as the Messiah. So there's some things even in Bouvier's Law 1856 that offended the current Jews who think they're Jews under the covenant. But their covenant's over because it's been opened up to everybody. So therefore, everybody, whether Jew or Gentile, had to accept Christ. And therefore, you're either a Christian or you're on the other categories. And the other categories are participants in something that's about to be doomed and destroyed. So we're going to read out of Bouvier's Law. It's the definition of gens, and I think that hopefully you understand that there is a group of high officials that meet. We've had G8 summits, G20 summits, got a lot of news attention. Well, it's really relating to the gens. You can believe whatever that G stands for. That's up to you. I'm just going to go that the odds are more in favor of the fact of what I'm stating here, that it represents these Gentile nations, because we're in the times of the Gentiles right now. Gens, it's a Latin word. In Roman law, a union of families who bore the same name, who were of an ingenuous free birth, ingenui, none of whose ancestors had been a slave, and who had suffered no capitis diminutio, reduction from a superior to an inferior condition, of which there were 3 degrees, maxima, media, and minima. The first was the reduction of a free man to the condition of a slave, and was undergone by those who refused or neglected to be registered at the census, who had been condemned to ignominious punishments, who refused to perform military service, or who had been taken prisoners by the enemy, though those of the last class, on recovering their liberty, would be reinstated in their rights of citizenship. The second degree consisted in the reduction of a citizen to the condition of an alien, and involved the case of a Latinus, the loss of the right of legal marriage, but not of acquiring property, and in the case of Peregrinus, the loss of both. The third degree consisted in the change of condition of pater familias into that of filius familias, either by adoption or by legitimation. Now, there's a huge amount of information past this, which we do not have to go into, and because you'll be able to read this firsthand. But what I gathered, and I hope that you understand this, that you have the opportunity to read the document itself, quoted out of Bouvier's Law, on the history of these gens and these surnames and these family names. And what I'm at a position after reading it several times, and I mean several times, because I run across this document going back about 5 years, 6 years ago. And when I first read it, it seemed very, very deep and very, very difficult to understand, because I didn't grasp a lot of the meanings that were in the basically in the writings here. So it is necessary sometimes for you to look up as much as you can to get a grasp on it. And we would have a very long video if we went and narrated this whole document, because the amount of Latin words that should probably be researched. But the key, or the gist that came out of it, that they really have a hard time proving any of their ancestry through the idea of this use of a surname or a tribal family name. That in fact it's almost lost. And there were so many people that were adopted into these idea of the use of these names, and therefore very few could ever prove it. Therefore it was almost a ridiculous thing to try to use it as a substantial evidence. And therefore the only ones that could ever really prove it would be basically you just writing it down and then claiming it. Because who's going to dispute you? Because they'd have to bring in the proof of it. But that doesn't mean it's still not error, because there's really no evidence of it. So I consider this in the essence of a very important word that we have in mental thought, which is that word imagination. And the Magi were pagans, so we have a lot of imagination going on in the theory of another surety other than Jesus Christ. And because the only spiritual thing that ever happened with a child at birth was really a given name that was given to the child, which would be like a gift. Therefore, this added on name generally had connotations of negativity. Usually a nickname, something that was put there to actually label them more like an outlaw or a criminal. Therefore, of no benefit of any good, and therefore certainly anybody not accepting Christ would certainly probably be on the criminal side. So our concern here is that we got really comfortable with things, as I did as a child, with things that I thought were really great, because I thought, wow, surname, a coat of arms, well, there's an arms. Doesn't sound very peaceful to me to be walking around with something that has swords and emblems of going out there to fight. And therefore, do I really as a Christian want to be called to arms to actually represent something from a bunch of pagans? A bunch of people who do not believe in Christ but claim they do, but prove false to it? Be very careful where you are, because these guys are led by the guys who actually turned down the actual amended will of Christ by not bringing him into their acceptance. Therefore, they turned down the last true king, who is above all others, above all names according to Scripture. And therefore, our lack of knowledge has led us down a trail to nowhere. And yes, you've signed every document putting that type of name together. You've merged two things that do not belong. And therefore, merger in law is confusion. So yes, there's a lot of confusion in the world. And therefore, you're the only one who could back it up. So now you can understand that if someone else is actually trying to claim that property under these royal families, who could be in debt to the same guys who didn't accept Christ, and therefore they've lent them money against these arms, you're nothing more than a debtor, is what your arms really mean, and that is what a surname or a cognomen or an arms name actually relates to, being under the Gentiles. So the Gentiles are debtors, mainly because they didn't accept Christ. And so the guys who are running the blood money of Christ are running the debtor side every time you sign. And of course, by chance, you do not sign without really looking at the fact is that you're the heartbeat for that deadbeat, because that deadbeat couldn't pay us a thing because he's in debt. He has nothing. So all you're doing is signing on to match the debtor. And therefore, it is nothing more than a flat line until you put that flourish on every line you ever sign. So it is a very dangerous thing to get too proud of this idea, because there's no good spiritual energy coming from this, and it carries a lot of problems, mainly things that are totally against your remedy as a Christian. And to discard this would be, the only way would be abandonment and to cut off the entail, and you're the only one that could cut it off because you're the only one energizing it by putting your name there. So don't wait for the government to say that they're going to actually somehow sever it. It's severed by your own behavior, by your own activity, because the power of Christ is in you based on the fact of accepting Him, and therefore you couldn't have the bad side by your total pure walking only with your Christian name. And because if you understood in law that you could do that still, because there is no law to stop you from that, but there's a lot of laws bounding you the minute you start to put the two together. So we will hope that this document that we've blown up really large here, because it was such small print, will help you when you see it on the screen. And therefore, through the production of the video, we've been able to use some technology in order to put it out there in a convenient way for you, so you don't have to go out there and purchase actually a Bouvier's Law 1856. And certainly we hope that it will help you in your journey in the understanding of names and their meanings and their origins.